Hello and welcome. My name is Grace Khanuja and I'm a senior consultant at Novaspace. Thank you for joining this webinar in the GSOA webinar series. Today's discussion will be focused on satellite capacity pricing trends and how pricing elasticity can be leveraged to unlock scale. Today we are joined by our esteemed panelists, Glenn Katz, Chief Commercial Officer, Telesat, Deepu Pillai, Senior Manager, Strategy and Market Intelligence, SES, Mark Curley, VP Pricing and Capacity Management, Eutelsat Group, Hadi Al-Hassani, Strategy and Business Development Consultant, Arabsat. Welcome. Before we deep dive into questions and discussions with our panelists, I would like to kick off the discussion by setting the stage in terms of the discussions that we would have and through a few pages of mine. When we think of satellite capacity pricing trends, there are a few considerations that come to mind. The first and foremost is the changing supply dynamics. The launch of new HTS, VHTS, and NGSO systems have altered the way we look at satellite capacity supply today from maybe like 5 years ago. It has been transformed from scarcity to abundance, which definitely adds a commoditization effect on connectivity and adds a downward pressure on pricing. Technological improvements are impacting the capex outlay and overall available or usable capacity levels that bring down the cost base of capacity, thereby giving more room to the satellite operators to devise creative pricing strategies. Other factors like end user applications, competition, etc., also bring about variations in pricing. Overall, with the rising supply and improving technology, the bargaining power seems to be shifting towards the consumers, thereby making a value-based approach to pricing a key consideration and also a topic that we will look at today with our panelists. Moving on, we briefly talked about cost base of capacity in the last slide. And this here we present the past 6-7 years of how the weighted average of cost-based capacity has trended over the three key HTS heavy regions. We see more than 80% decline in average cost base of usable capacity. And definitely this would have an impact on the changing capacity pricing levels. Another key aspect that we would like to explore and understand today is value-based pricing, which essentially means strategically pricing services while considering the value a customer gets and consequently their overall willingness to pay. As the satellite pricing trends shift towards a more value-based approach, dollar per GB as a metric is becoming a key consideration in the pricing strategies. As an example here, we show Starlink's 1 TB business plan and the variation in dollar per GB economics across regions. It captures their approach of aligning the pricing with the market demand and customer value beyond just the cost or cost base of providing these services. Having said that, I won't take a lot of time. I will move on to my questions with the panelists. And starting now with a top-down view, I would like to ask all my panelists some questions around general trends. So what are the general trends that you see today or have you seen recently in the satellite capacity pricing levels? And are there any variations at an application or a regional level that you would like to highlight? So maybe we can start with Hadi.
Hi, everybody. Yes, we are seeing changes in pricing dynamics. That's per service, per vertical, different areas. The area where we're seeing a lot of the most price pressure is enterprise connectivity. We don't do consumer broadband. We do other all the other verticals like enterprise, telcos, government, military, and the likes. So the area where we're feeling the biggest pricing pressure, where really capacity business, the vertical is getting commoditized, is enterprise connectivity. That's where uh, companies shop for the best price in the market, and that's where we're seeing a lot of. However, there are two areas at least that are holding up steady, which are government, military services, and telcos, uh, uh, sovereign networks like natural resources, oil and gas, mining, and the likes. These are resistant to the pricing pressure that we are seeing in the market.
Great. Glenn?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I would just agree exactly with what Hadi was saying. Now, the question is really, these answers are being expressed from a geo satellite capacity and pricing perspective. Clearly, there's a difference when you get to NGSO, and I think we'll get into that. But on the geo side, we've seen extreme price pressure, both regionally as well as application-wise, particularly in the enterprise. We've seen mobile backhaul sites go over to Starlink, as an example, be replacing typical geostationary satellites. And we all know the Starlink pricing, and I think we'll have a discussion about that. It's a tough time for geo satellite operators. I think there is still a little bit better elasticity, or less elasticity, if you want to look at it that way, when it comes to some of the mobile applications, aviation and maritime, depending on what the application is for maritime. If it requires guaranteed CIR type services, then you can continue to have a value on top of that. But if it's for ship welfare, as an example, those prices as well, we see going down dramatically over the last 3 to 4 years.
Yep. Okay. Mark?
I think I'll echo what the guys have said so far. I think that, in our opinion, it's not just the drive downwards of the pricing for those, let's call them consumer-like services, best effort type services, but it's the speed of the decline as well. It's very, very dynamic. Previously, we may have looked at reviewing pricing on maybe a quarterly or half-yearly basis. That increase now is we're keeping a very, very close eye on a monthly basis now, particularly in certain regions, driven by Starlink to a certain degree, but the dynamism of their pricing on a per country level, and I think probably the willingness for people to try out their service and suggest that it's apples for apples against probably, let's just say, more business-like services, is certainly making it an interesting time if you're in the pricing world.
Yep, for sure. Deepu?
Yeah, I would like to echo what the other panelists have said. So the pricing pressure has been more predominant in the data network side. In the video side, we haven't seen like much of a decline compared to kind of the data networks. One of the reason is like, I mean, the strong video neighborhoods like we have it 28.2 and 19. So they are kind of holding the prices, right? I mean, even though there has been an impact in the volume, the prices haven't been declined too much. Like, and in fact, the video business is also characterized by long-term contracts, right? So the pricing impacts, as Mark said, right? I mean, there we don't need to kind of revise the pricing, but there has been some local impacts in the video pricing as well. For example, in markets like India, in Philippines and all, there has been some pricing fluctuations compared to the video pricing that we see globally. There has been some pricing pressures. And on the data network side, I think there is regional variations that pretty much predominant, I would say. For example, in the case of North America, the KU band wide beam pricing, it hasn't been impacted much because there is not much replacement of KU band going on, right? I mean, in North America, so the pricing hasn't been impacted much. The same is the case in Europe, right? I mean, especially after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the demand for the capacity has gone up, especially in the eastern flank. So there hasn't been much impact. Where we are seeing most impact is in Asia and in Latin America. Asia, because of especially in Southeast Asia, where some of the national operators or the regional operators have launched some high throughput systems, and they are adopting a pricing for adoption strategy rather than more like a pricing for profitization. So this has kind of impacted the pricing. And in Africa region, I could say that there has been competition from the new launches, but the terrestrial penetration, in fact, in the last 4 or 5 years, that has also impacted the pricing a lot. So these are the overall pricing, regional pricing that we see in the market.
Yeah, some interesting points, and like you all suggested, we'll dive deeper in the factors that impact these pricing as well. So I'll start with the supply dynamics, because that's one of the key questions that we see come up. So my question to you would be, how is the abundance of supply, especially with the NGSOs coming in and constellations planned as well, how is it impacting the prices, and how is your organization adapting to this change in terms of pricing strategy? So maybe Deepu, we can start with you.
Yeah. So that's a good point, right? I mean, in fact, I like the way like scarcity to abundance, right? That is happening in the industry. So in fact, as I said before, like, I mean, this has basically changed the operator's strategy from like more to follow a pricing for adoption, right? Rather than pricing for profitization. So we do see that, like, I mean, a lot of burstable capacity with no CAR, which is available at a very low rate. And this has also kind of unlocked the price elasticity of demand, right? I mean, in fact, you can see that some of the new market segment has also raised, like fishing vessels, right? I mean, this was not a market before, and it has created a new segment. So what we do as a strategy to kind of counter this kind of, in fact, we are also a non-geo player, but focusing more on a different segments than the traditional Starlink kind of consumer broadband play. So we are kind of trying to focus on segments where we can derive a premium value for the customers and then price it accordingly, right? I mean, so we will be dwelling into that topic later, like value-based pricing. So for example, a multi-orbit product with a deploy, maintain, and operate solution for a customer like a government or a telco. So basically, what we are solving a customer pain of owning and operating their own network, and we are tapping on that customer's willingness to pay for solving that pain, right? I mean, and also we are filling that gap that a Starlink cannot offer, right? I mean, providing an end-to-end service. So that is one of the strategy. And second is like, I mean, also to compete in these low burstable kind of products, like to tweak some of our products to have more contention, less EAR, so that we can also match up with that products, right, in areas where we decide to compete. So we follow both these strategies to kind of address this threat of this abundance of supply and the commoditization of the pricing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then Mark, I would like to ask you because you have a Leo constellation already in available. So how do you feel about the abundance of supply that's available, and how is the organization adjusting to the pricing pressure from the likes of Starlink?
I think that given the majority of the service that Starlink provide, and they're let's keep calling it consumer-like services, there are some particular qualities of what you need out of that service that work perfectly well for consumers, obviously, and maybe some small SMEs. As Deepu said, I think that we certainly are concentrating on those use cases and those verticals where it's not just about some kind of connectivity. It's very specific connectivity, and it's connectivity with a set of qualities, be that security, be that guarantees, be that resilience, whatever it is. I think that's something that we're certainly concentrating on and trying to kind of double down on there. Mobility, as Glenn said earlier, I mean, that's something that certainly, if you have more critical need for communication, then a best effort service just doesn't stack up. I perfectly understand people experimenting with it, see how it works, and if it does work for them, fantastic. As far as the abundance versus scarcity piece, I think I was trying to remember the name of it. It came to me. There's a Jevons principle, which is that if you open up some of the technology and the efficiencies of the way in which you use that supply, then actually the increase in demand outweighs what you previously may have had. So the reduction in price, although that's very hard, if you imagine demand staying the same, yeah, it's a difficult situation. But I think actually, to a certain degree, some of that reduction in price and certainly the barrier to entry for things like user terminals, I think what that actually opens up are new markets, as Deepu said. I think that then opens up the thought that, okay, this wasn't something we viewed as something we could possibly have before. Maybe this is something we can have now. It also possibly opens up the ability to think about, if you need that resilience, about bonding two different types of networks, so that you just don't have a single primary network that you're relying on. Actually, you bond it with a secondary one. I mean, we've seen a number of instances where OneWeb's been bonded with Starlink, to give high MII burstability, but also the guarantees of some CIR in there as well. So I think the abundance, yeah, it comes with some pressures on price, but I think it also opens up opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You mentioned Starlink and the user terminals as well. So on this, there's an audience question that I would like to include here, which is from Glenn Canales. It says, in addition to the cost base of capacity, which we will come to, Starlink hardware cost and ease of deployment are also steering customers in their direction. They don't need costly parabolic auto-acquire systems. How do you recommend combating this? So, Mark, do you have would you like to answer, or anyone else?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if you're talking about systems where some kind of connectivity is okay, then I think, any of us could have created flat panel, very, very cheap flat panels where you get some kind of connectivity, and sometimes it's much higher and sometimes it's much lower, depending on, satellite coverage at that particular time. With the constantly moving satellites, you're obviously flicking from different satellites and different planes at one point to another. I think that suits some of the market really well. I think, though, the necessity for some high power, high accuracy satellites with better efficiency on the network as well. Let's not forget that some of the ESAs come with some pretty poor spectral efficiency. I think the parabolics still have absolutely a place if you want those guarantees. They are more expensive, but I think that for those use cases where that is required, then for that critical communication, there is value in a higher price to pay for it. And that might be the value of entry. I mean, then you get into the way in which you deal with that as far as commercial models, because you're not really talking about hardware and a service. From a consumer point of view, from a customer point of view, let's say, you're only really interested in the total cost of ownership over the course of 3 years, 5 years, whatever you want within that network. So it's, a barrier to entry that you can get around with some innovative commercial models. But it's understanding what the real needs are of the customers are, and then their willingness to pay for the value that they get out of the service.
Grace, could I add to
Yes.
Marcus? Yeah, first of all, just a shout out to Mr. Canales, who was a former colleague in the past life. So interesting to hear him ask a question. But it's a really important question, and we have to be very honest with ourselves. The technology that's available for geostationary satellites today, both on how do you interoperate, they're all bespoke systems. Every one of us, including ourselves, whether we provide services or we do it mostly through our service providers, we're mostly a wholesaler around the world. In Canada, we actually do provide services direct to government and enterprise. It's tough because of the dynamics and the physics of the system. To be able to drive low-cost, easy, interoperable flat panel antennas, I would say is not easy, if at all, not super possible when it comes to geostationary type satellites. Yeah, high HTS satellites, you can get a little bit better for sure. And this is where, for instance, Telesat took the view several years ago before I arrived that we have to move into the LEO space. And so once you're into that space, now you're creating a dynamic and you're creating a technology that has advantages in terms of the ability to make lower cost terminals. And then you have to be able to create a system that is completely interoperable so that it makes it easy for the end user customer and comes with sort of standards. And that's kind of the approach that Telesat has taken, and we're seeing the results of that. To Mr. Canales' point, is that people like Starlink services because they're easy to operate. We ourselves have to do that in creating our newer, let's say, next generation networks. It's table stakes.
Anything to add, Deepu or Hadi, or I can move on to the next question?
Just one point, just one quick point I want to add regarding the abundance of supply question. I think this is more theoretical than realistic, and especially in a region like ours. It might appear like there's an abundance of capacity, like from Starlink and OneWeb and the likes, but the barriers to entry, as my colleagues have mentioned, the barriers of entry are really, really high in our region. So it's not like the end customer, whether it's a consumer or whether it's an enterprise or whether it's a telco, has just the option available off the shelf, whereby they say, okay, I'm going to grab a Starlink or I'm going to grab a OneWeb, versus an Arabsat service. It's not like that. I mean, they don't have the landing licenses. Some of them don't. The uh, the uh, the terminals are not available easily. They cannot come. You know what I mean? It's different countries have different the security gateway requirements. I mean, some of the countries in our region, they have granted licenses to NGSOs, but the service has not started because that NGSO did not, have not rolled out their gateways or their remote landing stations. So yeah, it might appear like, the theoretical capacity or the usable capacity might seem like there's an abundance of capacity when you talk in terms of gigabits and terabits. But when it comes down to reality, the devil is in the details. That capacity might look like it's available, but you really cannot grab it that easily. And that gives us an advantage to address and realign our efforts in order to gain those customers, and can do our best to keep those barriers to entry up. That's for the best. And definitely, the change is there. The change is coming, and all geo operators, like my colleagues here, they're steering the gun down the barrel, and as a result, me and Glenn and the team are working very hard in order to find a way to work together between Arabsat and Telesat on the Lightspeed constellation, whereby we can have a joint offering of that service, multi-orbit joint offering in our region and beyond.
Yeah. Deepu, you wanted to add something?
No. So basically, we may not be able to kind of compete as in the flat panel, but we could do a lot on the deal flexibility, like commercial models, like building the equipment cost into the OPEX and those kind of stuff we can do. And we are also currently kind of trying to optimize the cost by tapping into the low cost manufacturing locations, and also that we can also kind of get some benefits of those cost economics and lower the barrier of entry, right? I mean, these are some of the strategies you can do if you're not a vertically integrated operator. Yeah.
Thank you. So I would move on to my next set of questions. So we spoke about supply, and we also briefly mentioned like the technological improvements and any sort of technological advancements to capture next gen. So on that note, I would also want to talk about the cost economics of the system. So my question to the panelists would be, how do you assess the higher supply from NGSO constellations, which we just spoke about, with a favorable cost base impacting the industry in regards to the capacity pricing trends that you see? And are there any strategies that your organization is employing to improve the cost base or to counteract that effect? So I'll probably start with Glenn to give us like an upcoming constellation LEO aspect as well.
Yeah.
So
Okay, great. Well, thanks. Yeah. So some of the folks here, my colleagues, spoke about flexibility in facing competitive situations with, let's say, LEO constellations today, which is really Starlink and OneWeb. And I think Deepu said it best, is it's flexibility, right? Before, as a satellite operator, I'm going to speak on the GEO side first, and then I'll move on to the LEO side and give you my perspective there. Historically in this industry, we would sign and try as hard as we could to sign really long-term fixed firm contracts with our customers. And if those customers were wholesale, most of us would wholesale. That's Telesat's approach from the beginning, and will continue in terms of our Lightspeed product. We will wholesale capacity to others to create services, like Arabsat as an example. But in the past, we would lock these service providers, not Arabsat, they're a satellite operator, but other service providers, into long-term contracts. Well, that has gone out the window now. And so showing flexibility for geo-related services, sometimes even going month to month, is something that was so foreign to us, but now we're doing that. And that's a good way for service providers, if we're wholesaling capacity to them, to try to compete against, say, Starlink, who's going direct in most of the markets that we're in. Now, in terms of LEO-related activity, in terms of how do we assess this? Well, it's clear from our standpoint that we have taken everything and put it all into our NGSO constellation, which is called Lightspeed. We really do see the future of the satellite industry moving to that. The only difference is that our model is not to be a direct provider. we still want to keep that model where we're going to be able to create virtual network operator type systems for the folks like Arabsat to be able to work and also still make money off of the constellation capacity that we'll provide. And that all has to do with the cost basis of NGSO satellite systems versus overall geo systems, besides the value it brings in terms of lower latency and those types of products. And I think you'll probably get into it, so I'll just stop there.
Okay. Hadi?
I think Glenn said it best. It's about flexibility. It's about changing the way when you've been doing business for the past 4 decades. It's sometimes you're not agile enough, and maybe you're not becoming attuned to your customers' needs and demands. And guess what? The NGSOs are a wake-up call. I know all of us, the legacy operators or the G operators had that wake-up call, and we had to adapt. In terms of cost base, and just wanted to say something about the cost base of capacity. All the studies that are done by Novaspace and the others, and when they consider the cost base of capacity, is really just the capex that is needed to build the infrastructure, but it doesn't take into consideration the terminal cost or even the power cost. When you're talking about Africa or some countries in Asia, power is a big issue, and these Starlink terminals, even the Starlink Mini, they consume a lot of power, more than they would consume if you are using definitely a terrestrial service or some kind of a community broadband. So in terms of cost base, yes, we are not as competitive as the constellations, but by adapting from a geo point of view, definitely we're going into the NGSOs in partnerships with the likes of Telesat. But in terms of the geos, one way to address the lowering the cost base of capacity is going for software defined flexible satellites, and that's what we're trying to do. We have 2 satellites in the pipeline. Having those satellites, then you can work with addressing your capacity to specific market. Like, it's no longer the days of long-term fixed contracts for the lifetime of the satellite or 5-year contract. That's gone out of the window. Now you're looking at, like Glenn said, maybe it's a year-by-year basis, and sometimes quarterly, and sometimes on monthly basis, depending on demand and concentration of demand, whether it's seasonal or it's location based or whatever. So that's an answer. And with flexible satellite, although they are smaller in size and throughput than VHTSs, but I think the flexibility compensates for that reduction in the overall available. So like a 100 to 200 gigabits flexible satellite, I think can have a cost base in the $10 per megabit per month region, and that to me is competitive enough if you combine it with the cost of the terminals, the power cost, and also the landing rights and blah blah blah, all the other things and also the spectral efficiency, like Mark has indicated.
Yep. I think I'll include an audience question at this point. This is anonymous, but they say, considering Starlink V3, Kuiper, and Chinese constellations deploy their service/network in 2026 to 2027, how can and how will it impact the capacity pricing for data networks? So is there anyone who wants to answer first, or should I call?
I just wanna say something real quick. I mean, if all these constellations go up, somebody's got to give. What I mean? Then all of them cannot be profitable and cannot be sustainable. So okay, let's hope these guys really filter each other out, and then we'll end up with the best in service. Just wanted to throw that on the table.
Maybe I'll
answer that.
Sorry, Hadi, is it okay if I say a few minutes, just a minute on something? So that's a really important question and observation, because you've got Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. These are people who've never been in the satellite industry for 75 years. And if they really thought that geo satellite services would be the future, they'd be building geo satellites, but they're not. They're building NGSO, and the Chinese as well are coming in, and Telesat itself is coming in that same timeline. But what's important, and this is important for all of us here, because the market, why would they do that? They would only do that if the market size was much bigger than the current market size of our geostationary world. And Novaspace, others, we look at that market in 2032, the target addressable market, to be around $630 billion. But more than half of that is unserved and underserved consumer-based populations, billions. And that's the focus of many of these constellations. That's the primary business focus of Kuiper and Starlink, and I'm assuming some of these Chinese constellations. Certainly you can use those services for enterprise, but the minute that there are better enterprise-related services that really focus on carrier Ethernet related type of services, like you would get from a rational terrestrial market where there's broadband best effort services that work for certain applications, then there's guaranteed CIR SLA services. And if you can do that from a NGSO perspective and provide that to the ecosystem that already exists that has customers, which is the existing geo satellite world, well, then I think there's a huge market, which is that second half, that would prefer those types of services, which historically geo satellite providers and service providers and equipment providers have been providing. And that's how I see the future happening here.
Right. So this is a perfect segue to the next question that I had. So I was more thinking about the leasing models. So my question was, how do you see the shift in wholesale capacity leasing to managed service offerings, like you said, evolve? And what's your take on SLA or CIR-based services versus best effort in light of the pricing strategies? I see, Deepu, you have unmuted, so if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, so in the past, the wholesale model was more predominant, as Glenn has said. Like, I mean, we were contracting the capacity for long term, even contracting the whole payload and stuff like that. So it helped in de-risking the capacity, right? Especially if you don't have service capabilities in some countries or restricted market, it was more ideal to kind of provide that capacity. But now we do see that, like, I mean, that would change, especially because, as you said, like, I mean, there is a commoditization of capacity supply happening, and the data network contracts are also kind of getting shorter duration, right? So every time you renew, there is a pricing pressure. So I think people will move away from the wholesale model more to a managed service model, because that is the way to kind of build stickiness to the customer and provide more value-based services and command a value-based pricing. But there could be some avenues where these wholesale models still exist, right? I mean, for example, you are launching a constellation and selling a part of constellation for a sovereign government need, right? And that is kind of a best wholesale model that is available for the industry, as you can see in some of these recent European Union contracts and stuff like that. So that would still exist. And again, for the constellations also, we will be seeing that the markets where we won't be able to provide the services, maybe due to regulatory access or things like that, there also this leasing models will exist. But overall, we are seeing that, especially as the industry is consolidating to build the scale for the managed services, like, I mean, we will see more and more of a managed service play coming into the picture, right? That is the strategy that most of my peers here are following, I can see. Yeah, regarding the SLA versus CIR question, so there is non-SLA versus CIR question. So there is a market for both, right? I mean, so there are a large set of customers who don't care about the SLAs, like their requirements can be met by non-SLA services, like as I mentioned before, the phishing missiles or SME broadband services. So we do see, like, I mean, they immediately adopt these services. But there is also another set of services, other set of customers which prefers the CIR service. So the trick here, or the main challenge for the operators, would be to kind of target that market, then find the product market fit, offering the exact product that the customer needs. Maybe it involves also multi-orbit. Then price it accordingly, right? I mean, according to the willingness to pay. So we have to sort out all these things, and then that would be your niche market, or your the market you can exploit, right? I mean, yeah.
Yep. Mark? Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I still think there's a case for some of the leasehold wholesale scenarios. I think it offers flexibility, certainly if you're wholesaling to another partner locally. I think it offers a great deal more flexibility. Some of the NGSO, let's call them plan tariff type models, are a lot less flexible. You can be very flexible with an individual plan. You can't be as flexible across multiple plans. So I think the leasehold model certainly opens up a lot of flexibility that some use cases. There's no denying, I think, that's on the downward trajectory, but I still do believe there's a case for it, certainly at the moment. We're certainly seeing it, and we're certainly seeing demand for multi-constellation deployments as well, where you actually have where we've actually got LEO and GEO side by side, where you've got the NGSO, we've got the LEO side on individual plans and tariffs, and we have a leasehold for the GEO side as well. There's some interesting technology, smart routing, and some interesting ways in which you can use both systems and give a low latency like experience, even if 80% of your traffic is going over GEO. I think what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with much more efficient uses of the system. And in some cases, the leasehold model still makes sense for a lot of customers, because they want that guarantee of what the service is going to look like for multi years. They don't want to flip between one service and another service. If hardware is if an original setup cost is something that you don't like, flipping between service providers gets expensive. There is no standard across the NGSOs. You can't move one terminal from Starlink to OneWeb to anywhere else. So I think that although there is a lot of excitement in the marketplace at the moment, I think that very soon things will settle down, and we'll find out in due time what the settling looks like and what applications utilize what operator or operators in order to get what they need out of the system.
I may jump in here, Grace.
Yeah.
My colleagues talked about the wholesale, but I just want to touch on a different aspect of the business model option that, and I like the way Novasat is categorizing it in their reporting, where they distinguish between raw capacity, managed service, and then end-to-end solutions. What we are seeing in our region is people are moving away from raw capacity. That was the cash cow for all of us. We enjoyed the golden age of just offering raw capacities and relaxing. And then we had to move into managed services. And what we are seeing is our customers or our partners, who are usually service providers. I mean, we do little B2C or B2G. We do mostly B2B. They prefer the managed capacity model to the managed service model, where you just offer them the capacity as megabits per second with an integrated like a gateway or integrated ground segment. But they do the rollout of the service. They provide the terminals. They provide the end-to-end service to their consumer. That seems to be the preferred model, and that seems to be the most successful model so far, because in our region, I'm not sure about Europe and North America and the rest of the world. In our region, all the services are provided through service providers who have licenses, and these licenses are pretty expensive, and they pay taxes, and they pay. So it's not that easy, to get your hands dirty into that. So a managed capacity type of which is, to me, is a hybrid way of management managed service. That seems to be a winning model, and definitely CIR is always preferred, because these guys have to offer some kind of a guarantee, SLAs to their end customers, who are not consumer. I mean, enterprise, telcos, government, and military, and the likes. So it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of hope and a lot of ways that we can move around in order to best address the problem.
Grace, can I just add one
Yes.
last? Yeah.
Yes.
I like that, no doom and gloom. Well, we're very optimistic actually in Telesat about the continuation of the wholesale model, but with a different technology, which is this NGSO. Because Hadi said it best, and Mark and Deepu, if we are all concentrating on that portion of the target addressable market, which is gigantic, which is non-consumer, right? If you're a consumer, it's a standard product. It's one or two types of services, and that's what you get. And if you're a service provider in a region, You're just reselling at very small margins. So the whole industry is moving, and I think it will continue exactly the way Hadi said, which is these service providers that are providing services which are usually different and bespoke, specific services to governments and businesses within their particular frame of reference in their territory. They need a service that's flexible, that can provide you LEO related wholesale bits that then you can configure and do what you need to create the types of services for your market. And so I see that as, we see that as a very positive move in the market, and we're trying to address that in the model, the go-to-market model that we're using for our Lightspeed constellation that's coming in. It's a wholesale model to service providers and satellite operators and telcos around the world.
And when we move to the managed services, do you see a bit of pricing pressure on the wholesale capacity? Do you see any intense pricing changes that you need to bring about in general, or is it just the way go-to-market model changing?
I can answer that. So basically now we have recently participated in some of these tenders where a bundle pricing was asked, right? I mean, especially in some of the digital inclusion projects that we participated in Latin America and all. So basically the government was setting a price. So per site you had to provide this price, right? I mean, and these were all the SLA requirements. And you could kind of flexibly plan your capacity pricing, your service pricing and everything. So I think when we move into that kind of an arena, like, I mean, we have a better leverage on the pricing components, right? I mean, we can choose a lower capacity, but we can play with the services pricing. We can optimize some of these, all these aspects. So I think that won't be like, I mean, when we move to the managed services, of course, the cost base of the capacity would be a factor, but we have a lot of other leverages we can play with so that we can get into the profitable arena, right? I mean, playing with a low-cost service, local service provider in the market, or a cheaper service terminal vendors, all these things. So that is kind of one of our key learnings from participating some of the projects recently, right? I mean, when we offer a bundle pricing, then the megabit kind of commoditization we can avoid, right? Even though some of these digital inclusion projects requirements are so aggressive, right? I mean, you have to innovate a lot to get into that kind of a profitable return on investment kind of pricing. Yeah.
Mark, Glenn, I see you unmuted if you have any points.
Mark, why don't you go first, if you would, if you have anything?
No, it's really interesting to see and very interesting to listen that actually there seems to be a lot of similarity amongst all of us about the way in which this is probably going to develop, which is good for me because that means our thinking's actually probably it's as good as everybody else's. Honestly, I think that I go back to what I said before. I think there's an awful lot of things that are up in the air at the moment. I think that we are forecasting fairly regularly now about the way things are changing, and I think that's not going to change for a while. I think the dynamism in the market we've got to stay very, very close to in order that we can see those opportunities and we can react to it and be flexible ourselves in the way we adapt to it. I think those big opportunity type tailored solutions, multi-year solutions, I think work where a lot of the factors are in our own hands, where actually the objectives of the RFP that's been put out we can meet and we can play with behind the scenes, keeping to the guarantees we need to, but also looking at the way the entire network is working in a particular region, let's say if it's Latin America or APAC regions, in order to be more efficient in our systems. I think it's less to do with now, I think somebody said before about throwing the capacity out there and it just becoming a profitability on the capacity side. I think we've just got to be a lot more efficient about our internal use of the systems in order to get the best yield. And that's probably where I think the market's changed a little bit from previously. Previously, it was just revenue. And I don't think that necessarily is where the market should be driven. It should be, certainly for us, it's about, okay, are we getting the right bangs for our buck? Are we using the system in the most efficient way, such that we can keep those levels and keep those guarantees, but at a price that meets market need?
Last word, maybe, on this topic?
Yeah, sure.
Great. So I think Mark just mentioned something. I always say this, particularly to my salespeople, the market sets the price, right? So when you're in when you're creating subscription managed services, there's a market price for that particular service. And that's great if you have owner economics on the capacity that's needed to do that managed service. If you're a service provider, your margin on that managed service that you may have to resell from someone like one of us is really not great. So it's not a very good sustainable business model, which goes back to what I was saying, is that there is room for that, clearly. But the wholesale model, if you can do it correctly and leave margin for your service providers and allow them to create their own managed subscription services to compete with others, that's a big market for us. So I just kind of wanted to say that there really is a difference. Yeah, there's a complete difference between a wholesale type of model to a service provider and a subscription-based managed service. And it depends on whether you have owner economics and you don't. And if you don't, if you can create wholesale services to those service providers that they can profit and make money, then you have the potential to scale within the verticals that we're all working in respectively.
On this note, I think there's a question from Bruce Albert. They say some service providers are reselling Starlink to maintain their business in the face of the impact of availability in many countries. Which countries are protected from this? So essentially trying to understand in which countries is Starlink not impacting a lot, from what I gather from the question, but mostly talking about service providers reselling Starlink to maintain their business, briefly touching on what, Glenn, you were saying. And are there any regional or country level difference in such strategies taken up by service providers that you might have seen?
Mm-hmm. I can just say, from our experience, what we've seen even our customers, our wholesale service provider customers, I've seen it in Latin America quite a bit for mobile backhaul as an example, in terms of where some of our service providers are reselling Starlink just to keep a particular customer, and then also trying to provide other services that Starlink doesn't for an enterprise type of experience, still making very little margin just to keep the customer. We've also seen that actually in the sort of merchant space, in the maritime space, a little bit less on some of the larger ships, but the merchant space of that, the resellers that are in that business, they're reselling Starlink, but then hoping that they can get an NGSO service that will allow them to create their own services, kind of like what we're trying to do. So those are the two areas that I see, and we see what my colleagues say, the most, where we're seeing that effect of typical satellite service providers and or telcos that are reselling to keep their customer until the time that better types of NGSO services to address those markets are available.
Yeah.
Sorry, Deepu, after you.
Yeah. I would echo, so basically, we see in segments where the service providers are adding some value, right? For example, a consumer terminal, a direct consumer in a developed country can kind of install himself and then have all the power supply and everything. But even the consumer services in regions where there is a infrastructure shortage and a skill shortage, there we do see the service providers filling the gap of kind of installing, maintaining, and providing the 24/7 customer service that Starlink is not offering. So those areas. And regarding regions, I think it's globally. It only depends on where Starlink is available and not available. So basically, some of the African countries and the Middle East countries, they are not that prominent there. We are not seeing, and also in markets like in India and all. But otherwise, it's globally. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
No, it's echoing the same sentiment. I think it's a protectionist kind of holding position that a lot are going through at the moment in order to keep the business, as Glenn said. And again, Deepu, as you said, I think the value add, certainly for Starlink, I think is in support. I absolutely believe right now that is probably one area where their service from a business point of view doesn't doesn't really hold water for what the need is. So if service providers are managing that and getting the support from Starlink themselves on top of it, then I think absolutely that's value you can add on top. But generally, I think they're just dying out for something to replace what they currently have, what they're holding their position with, and it's maybe taking a while to pull all of that together, because some of us have been around, and these are big organizations that have operated and had a thought process and a culture that's worked in a particular way for quite a while now. Changing that is, even internally I was previously OneWeb only, and our merger with Eutelsat, we can see that trying to work through how we work together and how we meet these new demands can be sometimes difficult, because we've built these systems and we've built these processes up over a long time. So it'll get there. We just need to get there quicker, and we just need to make sure that we fulfill those needs, so that there are options. Because that's the thing I don't think a lot of these service providers have. They don't have an option, that this protectionist kind of holding position is all they've got, so they grab it.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, so I'll move on the discussion to value-based pricing. If you remember, we spoke about the value-based pricing in the initial slides, where we spoke about how important it is to understand the customer perceived value to the customer and consider the overall willingness to pay from the customer. So my question to the panelists would be, how does your organization align the pricing with perceived customer value rather than just the cost? And how significant do you think is dollar per GB as a metric in understanding these satellite service pricing? So maybe we can start with Hadi.
Yes, actually, value-based pricing is to be very frank, the backbone of our business model. I mean, us being a pan-Arab operator, our main shareholders are the Arab governments, and we've been perceived for the past 4 decades as the preferred, the home base, or the preferred satellite operator for the region. And as a result, there's a lot of trust, reliability, sovereignty issues that come with that. And as a result, value-based pricing plays a critical role in what we offer, especially when we talk about government, military services, and telcos, and some of the verticals like oil and gas, mining, and the critical services, the critical infrastructure for each individual country. So value-based pricing is important, but we are seeing some commoditization on some aspects, like, for example, enterprise services. There is some commoditization. We're not into the consumer broadband market, but there's a lot of commoditization there for the operators that offer it, and they're suffering terribly as a result of that. Mobility, it's not highly commoditized, because and it's a small segment for us, because there's also this security, sovereignty, and it's a sad thing, but the world is not as nice and as pleasant as it used to be, maybe a couple of decades ago, where everybody was talking about globalization, and now we have this the geopolitics of the world, not just the region, the entire world is making it more difficult for many countries to have that resilience of their network, and they have to rely on an operator they trust, reliable, who can offer them the service, who's part of their home base. And for some critical infrastructure connectivity services, that's very important, and that's where we offer the customers premium service, CIR, and we go above and beyond. Sometimes we even go to the point of offering them the ground segment at cost, in order to enable their networks. And in terms of payment plans, we do take a lot of things into consideration, because some countries are less fortunate in terms of their cash flow, or their economic situation versus others, and that makes a difference for us. It's not just purely dollars per gigabits, or just what is the lowest price. There's a lot of value-based aspects that go into what we offer, and that's been good to us. That's been good to our balance sheet.
Ibu?
Yeah, so value-based pricing is a relatively new concept, right? I mean, to the Satcom industry. Like, we have always been kind of pricing either cost plus profit or competition benchmarking or the supply demand pricing, right? I mean, but like, I mean, first we have to kind of identify a really good value metric that is easily understandable by the customer, and we should align the value with the customer, what he perceives, and that value should also grow with the usage of what customer uses, right? So as you mentioned, the dollar per gigabyte is a very good metric in that case, because if you take the case of telco, like, I mean, because they are using that same metric to their customer, right? Or if an airline service provider or a cruise ship, like their customers are paying per dollar per gigabyte. So it is an easily understandable metric, and it is also kind of growing with the usage of the value. So this is a kind of good approach to pricing, but we also see that there would be some challenges following this approach, right? Because Satcom is not like a mobile phone; it comes with a kind of capex and opex equipment. So there is a risk of a low usage by the customer per month, or there is also an unpredictable revenue, right? We cannot work in a industry with an unpredictable revenue every month. So even like, I mean, we see that a fixed price plus a volume-based usage, that kind of model is getting more predominant. Even Starlink in their latest price releases, they have also introduced a fixed fee, right? I mean, the terminal fee, even if you don't use it or you use it, you have to pay like per month. So that kind of model will be coming up. I assume, like, anyway, like, I mean, this is one of the model that is going to be more predominant, especially when you are moving from a wholesale to a managed service, right? You are solving a customer's pain, and you are measuring what is the customer's willingness to pay, and you are pricing accordingly. I think that model would surely be the way forward.
Yep, thank you. So, final question to close out the discussion today, and it also echoes with an audience question as well. So, how do you consider vertical integration as a strategy to enhance pricing elasticity and consequently unlock scale? And how do you use vertical integration, or how do you think about vertical integration to compete with Starlink, who's already vertically integrated and can control a lot of parts of the value chain? So we can start with Mark.
Yeah, I think from a Eutelsat point of view, I think we're fairly vertically integrated as far as giving as many options as we can for LEO and GEO. As far as moving down towards further and further down to the customer, I think some of that offers some opportunities. Strategically, we're definitely thinking about better ways in which we can manage the network on behalf of the customers, and what extra services we can provide that take some of the headache away from them. That's certainly an area. I mean, strategically for us, it's about staying as close as we possibly can to the customers, understanding their needs, and then being as flexible as possible internally in order to meet some of those needs, not on a one-off basis, not for just bespoke projects, but looking for trends that allow us to be able to roll out new services without bending ourselves completely out of shape just to do that. So I think somebody said it earlier, we just need to keep looking to the customers, seeing where their pain is, and then trying to address that as much as we possibly can. As I said, without killing ourselves in the process.
Yep. Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, satellite operators historically, from a geo model, in terms of the industry, this was never really vertically integrated, but we had owner economics because we owned the satellite. We invested capex and we owned the satellite, and they had a life of X years, and then the rest of the industry filled out that chain, right? You had the service providers and then the equipment providers. When you talk about, though, vertical integration in your question, your example with Starlink, it's a different dynamic. It's not really, you can't compare vertical integration for an NGSO to geo satellite operator type of economics. But I can tell you then, to answer it from a different perspective, as an operator that's moving into the NGSO world, we took a specific choice not to be vertically integrated. I mean, what we own is, we own our economic property. We'll own the satellites. We'll own all the landing stations, but we're having others build our satellites for us and build our landing stations and use their technology, because the industry is been around for 55 years, and there's expertise in those particular areas that, let's say, as a satellite operator, we don't have. But what do we do have, and where are we vertically integrating for our NGSO solution? Clearly, it's our system and it's our software. Because in the end, these satellites that we're putting up are software defined. And what we all think today our customers need, we know. What they will need 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years from now, we don't know. So we took a best of breed approach. Where did we want to be able to have influence on the future of our NGSO constellation? And then where did we want to use others who had expertise in certain areas of the satellite and the components that go with that, the launch? We're using SpaceX as our launch partner, as an example. They're pretty good when it comes to launching. We weren't going to build our own rockets. And when we put all that together, we've done our own analysis. Clearly, we can get to a cost basis that still allows Telesat, as well as the other industry, to grow and flourish in this really large target addressable market, which again is just a different dynamic than what we've all been used to the last 55 years.
If I may, Grace,
Yes.
go next.
Yes.
I don't think the Starlink type of vertical integration is a strategy. To be very frank with you, I think it's not right, and it's not. Imagine if the terrestrial operators or the telcos, each one were fully vertically integrated, just like Starlink, where they manufacture their towers, they manufacture the base station, they manufacture their devices. What kind of world we'll be living in? You cannot have roaming, you cannot move, you will be tied into one operator, you cannot jump to. That's not the future. The future, which I hope, I mean, we're all all gray hairs. I hope we see it in our lifetime, is to have interoperability, to have mass-produced terminals which work with different constellations, different satellites on the consumer side. I'm not going to manufacture my own satellites. I'm not going to launch my own satellites. I'm going to try and get as close to my customers as possible, like Glenn and Mark said, in terms of providing them the solutions, the packages, the software, the interfaces. But I'm not going to manufacture my own terminals. That's not something that is very smart, because I don't want to lock my customers to my solution. And guess what? Down the road, when the next big revolution in the flat panel antennas or the terminals comes along, whereby they're open standards, what's going to happen to Starlink and to Kuiper and these guys who have giant factories are producing hundreds of thousands of terminals? They probably become obsolete overnight, and then they have to adapt to the international standard. So that's, full vertical integration is really not a strategy, in my opinion. Okay, Elon Musk did it. Jeff Bezos is trying to do it. Telesat is smart enough to say, I'm not going to do that. OneWeb and SES with O3B, they said, you know what, I'm just going to rely on partners. And I think that's the future. What will really crack the code for all of us is to have that mass-produced, interoperable, open standards terminals, whereby you just grab the terminal off the shelf, plug it in, choose which constellation you want to work with, and that's that will be the nirvana for all of us. But vertical integration, the way Starlink is doing it, I don't think it's a strategy.
Yeah, Deepu, do you have last thoughts?
Yeah, I will keep it short since we are also
Yeah.
So I mean, our vertical integration has been in areas where we want to double down, or we think that we have a kind of higher right to win. So we downstream integrated. We acquired a service provider, DRS, to focus on the US military as well as the global military MilSatCom market. So we will be also continuing to look into that kind of both upstream and downstream integration, which can enhance our managed service capabilities in areas we want to double down or we want to focus going forward. And we would also look into some adjacencies, right? I mean, we are not limiting ourselves into SATCOM, but there are a lot of other technological innovations happening in the industry. So we are also exploring, we will also explore those areas where if integrating, we can have a higher right to win and higher play. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So this brings us to the end of our discussion. Any questions we did not have time to answer during the live program will be addressed in writing and posted alongside the video on the GSOA website, provided they're relevant for today's topic. You can watch the recording of the webinar as well as the previous ones on the YouTube channel and at gsoasatellite.com. A big thank you to today's panelists for sharing their valuable insights and to our audience for asking such insightful questions. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you so much.